Yo, 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 what is going on, COD Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, and today we are going to be reacting to some breaking news, which is the latest announcement from the CoD team surrounding migration and what really has been kind of the talk, or hot topic, of the town for the last number of days. As always, if you enjoyed the content, make sure you throw us down, because it helps out a lot. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to read through, maybe show you some data and a couple of things, and I'm going to give you my thoughts. So here we go. Dear Lords, also remember, don't kill the messenger, right? Because regardless of who's posting it, doesn't mean that it came from them. They could just be copy-pasting and then hitting enter. Recently, we have received player feedback about differences in server power capacity, threshold between different servers with concerns about causing unbalanced KVK matchmaking or potential shadow nerfs to some servers. In response, technically it's actually both, it's not or, so it's and. In response to this issue, we will explain to players experiencing such a phenomenon. Part of me feels like the word choice to use phenomenon here is kind of in poor taste, where it almost makes it seem as though they're saying already up front that like this is a lie without trying to like really try to address it by laying the groundwork and saying this is what the community is saying. So that way everyone who's, because you have to understand, not every single person who's going to read an announcement is going to understand the context of it. They're not going to understand where it's coming from, right? For those of us that are in it and we are breathing it, we're a part of it on a daily basis, or if it is happening to us or affecting us, we will be aware of it. But not every single person is. And so for me, just the way that you're writing an announcement, it's good to kind of preface things and basically set the stage appropriately, where you're explaining these are what the these are what the majority of the pieces of feedback and or complaints that we're receiving, and we're going to address these line by line. Right? That's how I would do something like this. So when you use the word phenomenon, it just almost makes it seem like, oh, we're just kind of blowing it up out of proportion, or we're just blowing smoke from nowhere, or we have no idea what we're talking about. And that's just kind of how it comes off to me, right? So it's really just kind of poor wording. That's what I take away from this. Now, I'm curious if other people feel the same way, or you're just like, no, I don't really take it that way. Just their word choice on that. I'd love to hear what you guys think. Regarding the shadow nerf concern, there have been no shadow changes regarding the server capacity within Call of Dragons. We'll get to that in a moment. All past changes regarding migration and server capacity have been announced before the change was executed in-game. Respectfully, and I say this respectfully because, again, for anyone who watches me, right, there are good and bad ways, in my opinion, to give feedback. Right, you can do it in a professional way, and you can do it in an unprofessional way. I very much like to take the former road instead of the latter, because I think it's just a better way to have a conversation. And so let's start by addressing the first line here, which is there have been no shadow changes regarding the server capacity within Call of Dragons. Well, regardless if it is specifically a shadow change or if it is something else that has happened, the fact is something did change. And we'll show this to you. Once again, I'll give you the quick TLDR here, right? So if we look at the power for the kingdoms prior, right? So these were the Beleren Season 2 kingdoms, the 119 kingdoms that were made up of 1 through 10, 22 through 90, 213 through 240, and 277 through 288. These are the kingdoms that are now in Season of Strife. But before they went to Season of Strife, they were in Beleren Season 2. If you're wondering where Beleren Season 2 is, well, that's here. Right, so all of those 119 kingdoms were here in this pre-war server. This is the phase where people can then join your kingdom from migration. They then ended up here in the SOS KVK, right? So there's 18 groups. So when we go back and we look at the power that these kingdoms were at prior, again, keep in mind here, prior to Brink of War starting, which was that 3-stage event leading into KVK that would give you some bonuses, rewards, etc., right, depending on where your kingdom placed, and then obviously for your alliance and personal. And then you from here, I think it was probably just personal and kingdom, but from here. Then you ended up having really the next stage, which is from stage 2 here in this event, you do a lot of training, right? So you have the big training event, and then eventually these kingdoms went from crowded to full. But before that, they were still crowded. We also took the data on migration rank, right? So kingdoms like 23 and 232 were brought in the most amount of migrants during this phase. TFS brought in 186, into that kingdom, right? So Kingdom 23 brought in 186, but that's TFS's kingdom. And then YBD from Kingdom 232, right? That kingdom brought in 186. These two kingdoms tied for the most amount of migrants that they were able to bring in during that period. However, they were still crowded. They did not go to full. So then you look at Kingdom 23, which they were at nearly 35 billion power. And then we look at, right, and we'll look at this now. So let's look at some of these kingdoms, right? Now you have a full kingdom, which basically is like 110 and 86. They're kind of rotating, and then I think 96 is probably there as well. But when I pulled the data here on the 25th, which was 4 days ago, they were coming in at pretty much, we'll just say give or take 22 billion. To be fair, that's about 13, or if you want to say 12 to 13 billion less power than where TFS was able to get their kingdom. So for them to say that there were not any changes made is technically incorrect. Now, if they were more specific in their language and trying to address exactly what so-called shadow changes they're referring to, and saying, oh yeah, well, there weren't any, maybe they could be right. But because they were not specific and they chose to provide a broad and vague language, making it seem as though, and again, I say this respectfully, it feels a little disrespectful, because it almost feels to me as though they're either downplaying or they're making it seem as though we don't know what we're talking about. And that is a little hurtful, because I would hope that from a development company, that there could at least be some understanding here, especially from someone, and I'll give you a great example, right? Especially from someone like when I was talking with Asya and Leo, right? Asya and Leo very much came across to me as though they're trying to understand, they're trying to bridge that gap. They want to kind of be the middleman, if you will, right? The consultant, so to speak, between the community, the content creators, and the development team. And so it does make me wonder if, well, okay, obviously Asya isn't here anymore, but with someone like Leo in that position or anyone else, did they reach out to anyone? Did they try to get feedback? Did they set up some conversations to try and have a better understanding of what's happening? Do they even have a full understanding of what's going on? There's just a lot of kind of unanswered questions and things that are left up in the air that really the only logical and I think rational reason that we can come to or answer, if you will, is like, what are they talking about versus what we're talking about, right? Because there just feels like there's a really big disconnect based on this announcement already, and it just doesn't feel as though this is really addressing what the community would like to be addressed. And that will only do more damage to your community than it will heal a community. So let's then look at this. All past changes regarding migration and server capacity have been announced before the change was executed in game. Okay, so technically this is incorrect because, again, if we're using broad and vague language, we're going to cover a broad and vague topic. And what that is this idea of that if they're saying that all migration and server capacity have been announced, if they're referring to slot capacity, then yes. Well, I mean, to an extent, right? Before, let's touch on the two parts here. The first part is that now every kingdom is at 300 capacity, right? Regardless of what your server cap is. However, to my knowledge, I do not believe that there was any public announcement saying that the change for kingdom statuses is going from normal, which was at 350, active, which was at 200 players, and crowded, which we always kind of assumed or figured might have been around 75 to 100, but could have been maybe a lower or higher range within. And then full meant that you just couldn't bring anyone in at that time. And obviously things have changed now with you being able to have the special migration, etc. But there was never a public announcement, again, to my knowledge, where it said it was going from that to then every single kingdom in every single season, regardless of activity status, with the exception of full, of course, right? So if you fell in normal, active, or crowded, would be going from what was 350 for normal, 200 for active, and then whatever crowded was, to it's just 300 across the board. I do not remember seeing that specific mail. Now, maybe it was sent. Maybe it was provided somewhere. I'd love for someone to post that in the comments if that's the case, just so there's a little bit more, viewability or visibility around there. And this is my thing on the other hand, is that if you're going to make an announcement like this, why not reference that? Why not provide a link to where that was posted? Why not provide a screenshot to where that was posted? Why not say this was posted in patch notes v1.0.24, go to number 3, line item 2, right? Or something like that. Or why not give a link to it if it was posted in the patch notes above here and say go to here and here and here, and then you'll find it. Why wasn't that done? I mean, this is such an easy... I mean, again, if they're claiming that it was posted and that it was communicated, why not just provide it? Right? Problem solved on that, at least on that part. So again, a very easy way to address this, but it just feels like the ball was dropped here. And it is unfortunate because, again, if they're claiming that it's there, why not just provide it? Right? That just seems like a very easy solution. And so then we get to the second part of this, which is that if, again, the migration of server capacity was announced before, now let's say they're not referring to slot capacity, which again, for those of you who might be wondering, like, okay, well, what is Boss talking about? What is slot capacity? So slot capacity is here, right? Spaces remaining, right? So we could just say, and I could just say spaces remaining, but slot capacity just sounds really cool. So, but spaces remaining, right? Space is the same thing. All right, it's how many spaces, how many slots do you have left? And what is your cap for that season? And so then we look at, okay, well, if they're not talking about that, then maybe they're talking about power cap, right? A server capacity could be the amount of power as well that you could do, because again, they didn't say spaces remaining, they didn't say slots, right? The devil's in the detail, if you will. And so if it's power, well, then that has never been communicated because they've never came out and said what the power thresholds are or what the power threshold cap is for each season, right? We did a video on this where I did the video, and I think I posted it earlier this morning. And we showcased all of that off. So you're able to see, right, what are the averages. It's not going to be exact, of course, but it will give you some averages where you can see now that for Bellerin Season 2, right, the cap is around 22 bill. You can see for Tamara Season 1, the cap is probably around 12 to 13. Probably around 12, give or take, for Bellerin Season 1. We go to pre-strife, and you see the highest is 13.3, so it's probably 12 to 13, give or take. And then you look at Season 2, everyone's crowded, but no one's above 9.3. Okay, so maybe it's around 10 or so, right? Or maybe it's the same here for pre-strife, right? Maybe it goes as high as 12. And then same here, right? Highest kingdom at the time when we captured this a couple days ago was 6.3 billion for 383, right? So maybe it's 8, right? Or is Season 1 through pre-strife or Season 1 through Bellerin Season 1, do they all cap at around 12 to 13? Right? Obviously, the kingdoms aren't strong enough on the earlier seasons, so we can't really say that definitively. But when we look at the data trending, we can infer. And this is really just the best gauge that we have. Why? Because they haven't given us any specifics yet. That is really one of the other things that we would love to have. On the other hand, we also acknowledge that players are concerned about unbalanced matching based on the different server capacities. Thus, we will roughly explain how the matchmaking system is calculated to explain how it resulted in differences in server capacity between server groups. So when I read this, what I am expecting to get based on the language they're using is I am expecting for the next post I read to specifically break down in as much detail as possible. Right, we're not saying give away your trade secrets, but as much detail as possible for why is it that the 119 kingdoms seemingly did not have a cap, or the cap was just, or the power threshold was a lot higher, to where kingdoms like TFS was able to get to about 35 billion power, but other kingdoms are being capped off at around 22 billion power that are in Bellerin Season 2 now. That is my expectation based on the wording here, because that is really the primary concern at this point. That and again, there are other concerns, but I would say that's the primary one because a lot of the individual concerns all have a common denominator, even if they have multiple. But I would say this is the one that really is kind of above all that comes back to a lot of the meat of the problems. So let's read. Our current matchmaking system calculations involve visible factors, including, but not entirely restricted to, right? This is one of those things where it's like including, but not limited to kind of a thing, but not entirely restricted to total server power. In addition to visible factors, we also consider invisible factors, that may impact a player's performance in matchmaking, including but not entirely restricted to in-game items. So maybe that is, and this is are not calculated as visible power. So an in-game item that I'm imagining they probably factor in is things like speed ups, right, and resources. So how many resources do you have stocked up? How many speed ups do you have stocked up? And probably it's more of like training speed ups and universal speed ups, right? Because they're probably calculating, well, what is your potential for whatever power you're at now, and then maybe what's the power you could be at, right? And that could be for things like training events, if you're going into your Brink of War, which is your Rise of Kingdoms EOTC. So they're probably also trying to do like projection analysis for how many more troops can you train, how much more power can you grow before the KVK starts. Just to give an example, right? Maybe it's more than that, but like that's something that comes to mind. Moreover, while we don't consider these invisible factors when displaying individual and total server power, they vastly affect the player's overall share and potential server performance, right? So it kind of goes in hand with what we were saying. Based on these, and this is my thing, why not just say that? Like that, I mean, again, right? I mean, if it's not that, I mean, just trying to think of like what else you could have item-wise. Okay, well, maybe it could also be, maybe if you have a bunch of legendary sculptures stocked up, maybe if you have a bunch of like gold medals, if a new legendary artifact or a new legendary hero comes out, maybe you have certain skills stockpiled for if a new war pet is introduced. I mean, those are things as well, right? But these are things that are in the game, right? So it's like, I just don't understand, why can't you say that? I don't know. It seems very kind of floofy to me. Based on these calculations, we will also consider the overall strength of the server in the same season to ensure there are servers of comparable strength in this pool of matches going into the new season together. So basically, it seems like they're saying that these are some of the factors that go into their matchmaking when they're looking at server to server and calculating or assessing strength that goes into trying to put fair matchmaking. Specifically for servers within the same season, a full server is considered one of the strongest servers compared with other servers within the same season and match pool, meaning that the total influence within that server is relatively strong instead of an absolute value. I mean, listen, all you had to say here is that a full server, a full status server, is at that moment one of the strongest servers in the season. Like, that's it. I don't even know why we included this line item, again, respectfully, because you're just stating kind of what everyone knows already. Now, if you were going to provide a little bit more insight there, okay, that would have been nice. But I just don't know if this, I mean, I'm not going to say like the line item is kind of pointless. I don't know if I'm strong enough to say that it's not, but it's just, I hope people understand, like, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. It's just, you're kind of stating the obvious at that point is what it feels like to me. Hence, there is a phenomenon of some servers experiencing lower server capacities from others than others from a visual perspective. Okay, so I don't understand that at all, right? That makes absolutely no sense to me. And again, that is probably because of the way that it's worded. Because if I read this, you're basically telling me that due to these invisible factors, along with any other visible factors that have not already been publicly stated that go into individual player influence, that combine or sum up to kingdom influence, that those are the factors on why it is exactly that a kingdom like TFS and 142 EIS and basically all of these kingdoms, right? So these, you're telling me that those are the reasons why these 8 kingdoms here of 23, 61, 84, 75, 57, 81, and 30 were all able to exceed 22 billion power on average, whereas all the other kingdoms that are now getting into Beleriand Season 2 are essentially getting capped off there, where we can see that based on this, with the exception of 110. Right, 110 would be the only exception right now. That was around 23 billion power. Again, we'd have to calculate it off as well. Now, also keep in mind, like I said before, this is soft power gauges, right? So we're basically taking any alliance that's at 1 billion power and above and just summing this up. If we wanted to do this a little bit more accurately, right, we would do something like a top 300 summed up total, maybe a top 400 summed up total. We would maybe look at players that are maybe over a certain power and then just kind of add everyone up in that kingdom that is over that power and kind of see what numbers we get. We could probably more or less figure this out based on, right, if we did that, then maybe we looked at other kind of smaller factors of like maybe some stats on player profile cards. Like we again, if I had a lot of time or just like a way to like just automatically pull data, I could probably figure out more or less a very close system to what they're using just through trial and error. But this is, I would say, this is still an accurate soft gauge, right, of how we're gonna do it. So again, you're saying that all of those invisible factors and then whatever additional visible factors were the reasons on why these kingdoms are able to be stronger than the current. I mean, okay, maybe, and I'll say this, maybe you could sell me on the ones that are like 24 and under, like right at the 24 bubble. Like you could maybe sell me on 52, 130, right? Because of the fact that one of those other kingdoms, I think whatever it was, 110, was at 23.2 when I pulled it. You could maybe sell me a little bit on that. But once you get to like 6 and 5 and above, I'm sorry, you're not selling me on that, right? This explanation does not explain, respectfully, why it is that those kingdoms are stronger than the younger. Now, we also know that there was a similar challenge, right? And I've spoken about this before, that happened in Rise of Kingdoms, where kingdoms like 1196, 1093, and a number of others were able to take advantage of lax migration standards early on, and they were able to become basically super kingdoms. 1196 lasted, I think, about 2 years when I was there as a top 4 imperium. 1093 is still a top imperium kingdom, or just a very strong kingdom in general. And right, one of the benefits was because of the fact that they were able to recruit so many people early on to basically establish themselves as a super kingdom, and then later on, right, however long, but pretty much shortly after, that's when you started seeing the imperium system come in. Other migration restrictions came in as well, and so this is just a repeat, to me, is exactly what it feels like of what happened in Rise of Kingdoms. And again, if there are some specifics and there is some data that they can provide to show how, well, that's not the case here in this situation, I mean, again, we'd love to see, but that's just not how it looks right now. Visually and publicly, it very much looks like they had a no cap. They allowed for some of these kingdoms to just recruit as much as possible, or they just raised the cap above 35 bill, so maybe it was at 40 bill, and then all of a sudden they drop it to 22. There was no other explanation that you could tell me on why you have some of these kingdoms that were well above, and then with obviously 1 and 2 being very far above, around that 22 to 23 billion cap, right, or power threshold. So again, it sucks a bit, because I will say I feel let down about this response. I do. This was yet again another opportunity for them to come out, be specific, provide some numbers, some examples. Again, we're not saying you got to tell us all the secrets and go into the source code and all that, but at least provide us more than this. I mean, this just feels to me like this is some kind of political type of like get out of jail free card statement, or they're sending me an email and all they've done is fill out the subject line, but there's no message body. That's how it feels to me. That's how it looks. And I think I'm well within that right, as much as anyone else, to reflect and to share my feelings and my opinion on this, because it doesn't take away that I still love the game and I want the game to be the best version that it can be. But it also means that we need to provide constructive criticism, and we need to be able to provide our feedback in a respectful and professional manner, regardless of if it's positive or it may be viewed as not positive. It doesn't mean that we're saying that, oh, well, the game is all of a sudden bad, and or anything to that extent. But what it's saying is that this is not the first time this has happened. And it's about sharing our feelings and making our feelings known and our views and our worries known, especially on these types of topics and situations, to the COD team, to the devs. And hopefully they do something with that, right? They at least hear us out and have a level of like respectful understanding for where we're coming from. And I think that is my hope at minimum. Then we get to the very ending here, which is we apologize for any misunderstanding regarding server capacity caused by the matchmaking system. In response to the misunderstanding caused by our mistake, we will ensure higher clarity in how information is conveyed in the future to provide a better playing experience. I mean, once again, and I say this respectfully, I really do, because I still feel that Call of Dragons is absolutely the best kingdom builder on the market right now. If you're talking about the best competitive kingdom builder, there's really nothing in my view that's close to it. But when I see responses like this, and then I see this last bit where it says we will ensure higher clarity and information and how information is conveyed in the future to provide a better player experience when playing Call of Dragons, I mean, I feel like I just got stabbed in the back with that. It feels to me that you kicked me when I was down, I was turned around, and you just drop kicked me, right? Like you shoved me in the hole and I fell to my death. That's exactly how I feel. Because How many times now have they said this, where they're going to ensure higher clarity in how information is conveyed? We're not asking for the world here. We're not asking, once again, for you to share your source code and the secrets, right, that are in your dungeon. What we're saying is that it would be nice to, one, know what the power thresholds are for kingdoms in particular seasons, because I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If anything, I actually think it'll help kingdoms out a lot more, because then they can plan and prep more appropriately instead of doing all this trial and error testing that they probably have to do to figure these things out. Just as much as I have to do to go and kind of do these deep dives. It would be nice if they could say, well, Bellerin Season 2, we have a 22 bill cap, right? Before you hit full status. In Tamara Season 1, there's a 15 or 16 bill cap. In Bellerin Season 1, there's a 13 bill cap. In Season 2, there's a 10 bill cap. This is not a difficult thing to do. And then, once we know what that is, then we can assess. Then we can pull some more data. We can see how the kingdoms are responding to that, right? And then we can make adjustments from there. Because then you also get to see what is then kingdom management and kingdom leadership deciding on, right? How are they then going to go about migration? And we can get a little bit better picture, because now we're not playing this kind of guessing game, so to speak. But really, and I think this is, once again, the biggest challenge here, is that there just clearly was a change. Right? So for them to not at least acknowledge that there was a change to some degree, because the data shows that so far, I don't know, man. It does feel like a slap in the face, and it sucks. I don't really know what else to say at this point, right? You know, it's I will say this, man. It is. I don't want to say that CoD is starting to give me like these Infinity Kingdom vibes, but for anyone here who's played Infinity Kingdom, you know that there were things like this that started happening, where shadow changes were being made, the way that they were making announcements, kind of communicating certain things near the end, right, when they saw a massive player drop-off and departure. It kind of felt a little bit like this. And again, that's my opinion, that's what I experienced in that game. And I hope, I can only believe and put some faith in the team that obviously that these things are going to be rectified, that there will be a little bit more clarity provided, that they will make positive steps, solution-driven, action-oriented steps to improve the level of communication and the transparency. Right? Because again, if not, it's hard to say. Right? It is. I feel like I'm just rambling at this point, but yeah, I don't know. I'm curious, man. Does anyone feel how I feel? Or is it, no, you know what, I appreciate the announcement that they made, and it solved all my worries. It did everything I wanted it to. It addressed everything. Right? Or are you somewhere in the middle? Right? I'd love to know. So let your boy hear from you in those comments down below. That's going to do it for me. As always, until next time, we'll catch you later.